This video is going to explain a type of graph that you are responsible for understanding in grade 8, and that is a scatter plot. So a scatter plot probably reminds you of some of the other types of graphs that you've seen in the past because it is similar, but there are some key things that make a scatter plot a scatter plot. So basically, a scatter plot is a type of graph that shows a relationship or a connection between two different variables. So a variable in math, particularly data management, has to do with what things your graph is showing and what do you have on the x-axis and the y-axis. So if you look at this graph here, it's a scatter plot, and you will notice that it has some key features. It has a title that tells you what it is showing. In this case, it's showing ice cream sales. It has an x-axis. In this case, that's temperature. And a y-axis. In this case, that's sales. So this particular scatter plot is looking at the relationship between the temperature outside, how hot or cold it is, and the amount of ice cream that's being sold. You could think about this as maybe data from an ice cream shop or an ice cream truck. Some other things to notice is that each piece of data is plotted on the scatter plot as a single point. So this is where it might remind you of a line graph where there were single points and then they were connected by a line. A scatter plot is different because there's no line that connects all of the dots. Okay, so how you would read this would be each dot would represent one day of sales. So the dot that I circled here, you would read that the temperature was about 12 degrees, maybe a little bit less because I'm reading it up this way, and that the ice cream sales were a little bit less than $200. Or if I wanted to read this point over here, the temperature was maybe about 25 degrees and the ice cream sales were over $600. So it kind of makes sense that the higher the temperature, the more ice cream is sold because people like eating ice cream when it's hot. So you might be wondering how to determine which variable to put on the x and the y axis. So I'm just going to change screens here. Oops. So here we're going to talk about what variable or thing that you're measuring to put on the x and the y axis. So here's another example of a scatter plot. It has to do with brushing your teeth. So on the x-axis, there's the amount of time that you spend brushing your teeth. Based on this, I'm thinking it's probably minutes, and I'm thinking it's maybe per week. And then the y-axis, so y-axis is over here, is the amount of plaque. So plaque is like the buildup that's on your teeth from eating and drinking, that sort of thing. So you'll notice that the amount of plaque on your teeth tends to decrease or get lower with the amount of time you brush. So like the more you brush your teeth, the lower the plaque. So we can tell that by looking and seeing like the lowest amount of brushing time, this point here, has the highest amount of plaque. And then like more towards the middle, it kind of balances out. But the longer you brush, the less plaque you have. So there are two types of variables. There's what we call the independent variable. That always goes on the x-axis. And then there's the dependent variable. And that's always on the y-axis. And you could think about these as, you have to think about how they're connected to each other. So independent variable means that you could brush your teeth for any number of time, and that's not connected to how much plaque is necessarily on your teeth. Whereas the amount of plaque on your teeth is directly related to the amount of time you spend brushing your teeth. Just because you have lots of plaque on your teeth doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to brush your teeth for only 20 minutes or 20 seconds maybe. Whereas the amount of time that you brush has a direct effect on the amount of plaque. So independent means it can kind of stand alone and you could graph that on its own. And then dependent means what is changing based on the independent variable. So if you think back to that first graph with temperature and ice cream sales, the amount of ice cream being sold isn't making the temperature a certain degree, but the amount of ice cream sold is dependent on the temperature. And finally, when we read scatter plots, we look for what we call trends or correlations. So scatter plots, again, are really great ways to demonstrate that there is a connection between two variables or two things, like temperature and ice cream sales, the amount of plaque on your teeth, and how long you're brushing your teeth. So you can kind of see here that there are three ways that you will see the points plotted on the scatter plot. It will either look like they're kind of going up to the right, like that, or down to the right, or there's no direction, they're just kind of scattered all over. So if you see the points going up to the right, that means that there is a positive correlation between the sets of two pieces of data. So, and when y goes up, x goes up. And as x goes up, y goes up. If we're increasing this way, we're also increasing this way. A negative correlation is basically the opposite. So if x is going up, y is going down. So you can see that in that downward trend that way. And then if there is no relation, you see the scatter points kind of spread throughout, we would say that there is no correlation. So if you think back to our ice cream graph, this would be a positive correlation. The higher the temperature got, the higher the ice cream sales. This would be the toothbrushing. The more you brushed your teeth, the less plaque you had on your teeth. We haven't seen an example with no correlation just yet.